My friend Trevor Ragan, welcome back to the Way Champions podcast, man.
We're back. This is one of my favorite ones to do. So when you shot me the email, I was excited.
I was so excited that you responded right away. I'm like, oh, sweet. Like, this is great. And that, I'm on your email list, and you have this new book coming out that you're releasing as an audiobook here, which is really the culmination of a lot of years work on your part, learner, how to get better at getting better. And I think that's a noble goal for any human being on the planet, right? I mean, you'd like to think.
Yeah, it probably help if you're a better learner. I can't think of a situation where that wouldn't be beneficial.
Yeah, I can think of plenty of people who haven't learned anything in a long time, and they're not really productive citizens. Yeah, or coaches or teachers or whatever. Yeah. So it's a great topic. It's why I've loved your Learner Lab podcast and your website and everything for so many years. And it was funny. I was just thinking, because every once in a while I dive into the podcast archives, and I dove into the one that I did with James Clear. And then I was just thinking about this today, how that trip when I met James was the first time I also met you working for PGC, and it was myself and you and James Clear and Alan Stein. And I'm like, holy cow, like the four of us have done okay these last couple of years. I think even the three of you have crushed me, but like I still feel pretty good. And it's like, wow. So I don't know. I just, it's amazing to see where you are right now. And I'm so excited you put it all into a book too.
Nah, same to you. I think I love our industry because you see everyone has their little corners and there's a lot of overlap, and kind of everyone's like growing together. And it's really cool to see the different directions people are going, the different topics people are starting to introduce. I love our industry. Good little squad.
Yeah. And we've all, we're talking off camera here about like, well, how did you adapt the last, 18 months, 20 months now, whatever it is. And everyone's found ways to adapt and remain relevant and serve people and give and businesses and sports teams have found a way to adapt as well. So it's been cool how we've all kind of worked together.
I think it's really cool.
Awesome.
Really, really, like, you can't talk about learning and then not be able to adapt a little bit over the last year with so much change thrown at us.
You'd like to think, and people ask me a lot, like, what's the plan for changing the game project? And I would still say I'm almost 10 years into this now. And if anywhere along this journey, if I had ever said, this is what I'll do a year from now, I'd have been wrong.
Dude, 100%. And so I realized that early too. It's like, oh, you don't really need like a step-by-step plan, because literally every time you would be wrong. And so it's better to just focus on like, okay, what are the things that I've learned in the past year? Where am I doubling down? What are some things I can cut? And that seems to be a better framework for progress. And then you'll end up who knows where. But I just think that's a more efficient use of time than plotting out your next 5 years. Because like you said, even 2 years, every 2 years, I've been shocked at sort of the direction, the pivots we made, the groups we work with. It's really fun, but that was an aha moment for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then you don't also waste a ton of time like planning for something that's never going to happen, right? Or being scared about something that might not happen, which I think really fits into your work as well, of like, just what's in front of me. Like, let me deal with what's in front of me. Let me have a thought of where I'm going, but let me also be flexible enough to pivot if I need to. And really, that's learning, isn't it?
100%. Big piece of it for sure.
Yeah. So let's kind of start, because you start this new book talking, again, your analogy, and you've talked about it with us before, the zoo versus the jungle tiger. But, obviously something that I love, and I think it's such a great analogy. So maybe you could break that down for our listeners of like, what does that analogy mean and why is it important?
So it's how we're going to start every conversation on learning, because it's sort of learning in a nutshell, which is, if you compared the life of a jungle tiger to a zoo tiger, very different situations here. Like, one tiger's life, easy, struggle-free, challenge-free, change-free. Jungle tiger's life, way more change, way more uncertainty, way more struggle. Big picture, which of the two tigers would develop more? Well, you could ask that to a 5-year-old, and 5-year-olds would say, well, the jungle tiger would. Of course, the jungle tiger is going to develop more than a zoo tiger would. And I know that seems like a simple comparison, but if you start to unpack it, you're like, well, they're both tigers. So that the gap between the two wasn't necessarily something they were born with or certain tools they had. The gap was more about their experiences. And so big picture, it's just a metaphor for the fact of learning that if you're trying to grow, whether you're trying to grow a muscle or a skill, you have to stretch a little out of the comfort zone to grow the best. And so we use this analogy to kind of like sneak up on people and make a point where every human would agree that the jungle tiger would learn more, but then you flip it on them and go, okay, that's true. But when we are in learning situations, in big and small ways, we get to choose which tiger to be. Like we really do every day. In big and small ways, we can choose to learn like the jungle tiger. We could choose to learn like the zoo tiger. We can choose to ask questions, have tough conversations, learn a new jump shot, or we can choose to not ask questions, avoid tough conversations, or we can avoid learning new skills. And so the way that we make it more actionable is like, look, we can choose better or easy every day in big and small ways when we're in learning situations. If we're choosing better a bit more often, if we're choosing the jungle a bit more often, we're going to grow more than if we're choosing the zoo more often.
Yeah. And I love that analogy because, like you said, it's the same tiger. He's just as strong, just as tall, just as fast, just as whatever. But hey, when these two meet in the wild, who's going to kick whose butt, right? And no one would say it's the zoo tiger, you know.
No one would.
And so I get so I mean, I was just going to say, because I get asked all the time, like, if you could give one piece of advice to parents, right, in youth sports, what would it be? And I love it along this line of, prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child. Right. And the zoo tiger has the path prepared for him, and the jungle tiger is prepared for the path.
Exactly. And so it's like, there's so many different angles you could take the metaphor, and leadership and parenting and coaching is one of them, which is, look, we mean well when we're trying to be supportive and we're trying to solve problems for people. But if we go off the rails with that, essentially what you're doing is raising a zoo tiger. And then what happens is, I don't care what you're doing, eventually you're thrown into the jungle, whether that's the game, going to college. At some point, you're thrown into different jungles. You're thrown out of your comfort zone. But if you've had 0 reps of dealing with that, that's going to be tough. And you flip it back. It's like, okay, take a tiger from the zoo and put it in the jungle. What's going to happen? Yeah, it's in trouble because it doesn't know how to survive out there because it's never had to do it. And so we keep drawing this back to principles of learning, which is you get better at stuff by doing it. So if I'm never allowed to struggle, never allowed to solve problems, never allowed to deal with setbacks, it's impossible to build those skills because the reps are gone. And so this doesn't mean we just like let people like flop around out of their comfort zone and don't support them. It's like, no, we can be on their team and support them, but we're just not trying to rob them of those opportunities to build these skills.
Yeah. And we're not trying to rob them. And in doing so, we also, as a parent, as a coach, as a teacher, we have to be willing to see those who we love struggle. Right. And we I think the hardest thing to know as a parent is, when do I intervene? And I always try to say, you don't intervene when it's difficult. You do intervene when it's dangerous. Right. And that's not a black and white. Of course, at some points that's very black and white, but at other points, that's not black and white.
And it's like, so when we're saying like, don't rob them of the struggle, that like we can still support them and have conversations and say that, yeah, this is hard and this is scary and this is causing tough emotions, and how you're feeling right now is normal. It's human. Like we can still be in their corner working through the problem. We're just not trying to solve it completely so they like don't get to move through it properly. That's what we're like really trying to fight against.
Yeah. And embracing those moments of difficulty and sitting there and saying, what's good about this, right? Like I think my advice to coaches all the time and to parents is, after every game, what went well, what needs work, what can you work on in practice this week, right? Because even if you played great, something needs work, and if you played terrible, something went well. And I think that sort of thing, I guess in my N=1 experiment of my own children, at least makes them self-reflective of every game. And I shouldn't have to get in the car and tell someone that they didn't do well. Like, they should know that. And if they know that, then what the heck's the point of me beating them up on it?
Yeah. And we're not like, getting good at reflection and learning, which go hand in hand, doesn't mean we're creating little robots. It's like, hey, if you didn't play that well, or the game didn't go how you expected, it's probably going to cause some tough emotions. And we're not saying shut those emotions off, focus on what you can get better at. It's, I think, a more humanistic approach, which is sometimes when the game doesn't go as planned, it feels weird and it causes discomfort. That's a sign that you care and you value this. And at the same time, we can reflect on it. What went well, what didn't, what can we double down on it? Then on the flip side too, like sometimes it's like things went well and we're like, no, but we messed this up and we got to fix this. And we're shutting off the positive emotions too. It's like, hey, we're humans. Stuff goes well, we're going to be happy. If things don't go as planned, probably not going to be happy. Either way, there are opportunities to grow. There are things to appreciate, and those are always there. Yet sometimes this approach of shutting down the positive and negative emotions sort of masks the learning opportunities that are baked into those situations. And I mean, all of this is easy to talk about. It's hard to do, but it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've shared the story here. I heard an interview with the golfer Paul McGinley recently, and he was talking about one of his big moments was when he met Jack Nicklaus, right? Greatest golfer of all time. He was a young pro, and they had this dinner together. And after the dinner, Jack Nicklaus pulled him aside and said, you're embarking on a professional career. He goes, let me just give you a piece of advice. I'm the best golfer who's ever played, and I lost 90% of the time. So you want to be a good golfer, you better figure out what it feels like to lose and how you deal with it, right? Yeah. And I think this fits into your thing, right? Of like discomfort. Like if I look at it as like, wow, that's good. Discomfort, this is good for me. Fear, I mean, maybe fear, or maybe talk about like fear, like what prevents people from taking the jungle tiger approach to things.
Yeah. Okay, you just teed that up perfectly. I could tell you're a professional. So this is the part of the jungle tigers. Like, I've been talking about the tiger stuff for 7 years, and it's like I like watched an old recording of it and I kind of cringed because it's like it can come across as a little like not preachy, but a little just do it, just be tough. And that's kind of how I did it early on. I'll be honest. It's like, no, just jungle tiger. It's better. Just do it. The pivot I've made and a big adjustment that I've made recently is with any behavior change, learning, jungle tigering, eating more vegetables, sleeping more. You get more of a bang for your buck by focusing on mindsets and environment than just the behavior. But the problem is, like, and I'm guilty of this, and a lot of leaders are, we try to achieve a behavior change by talking about the behavior. No, you need to learn more, need to jungle tiger more, need to be resilient, need to eat more vegetables, need to sleep more. And we keep saying that in 1,000 different ways. What I realized is, okay, if you want the behavior change, attack it through mindsets and environment. So how do we shift our mindset to become a better learner? I think there's a lot of things we could do, but maybe the two biggest, most helpful, one is shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Terms that people are familiar with, but when you present it this way, you see why it matters. Fixed mindset is this idea that I sort of have my skills that I have and can't really change them. Okay, if I can shift that to more of a growth mindset, which is the belief I can build skills, yeah, that's a relevant mindset shift to make if I'm going to become a better learner.
Mhm.
The other mindset shift to make, I don't have a good name for it. Some people call it stress mindset. Some people call it reappraisal. But the shift essentially is moving from, it is bad to be nervous, it's bad to be uncomfortable, it's bad to be afraid, to, in learning situations, those tough emotions are human, they're expected, they're normal, they're a part of stretching out of your comfort zone. So you see, I'm recalibrating how I interpret those tough emotions. And so this 1-2 punch of, I believe skills can be built, I understand that feeling nervous and uncomfortable isn't necessarily fun, but it's a part of the learning journey. Those are 2 important shifts to make. I'm creating a foundation that will help me achieve this behavior. And then the final step, which I've been really curious about, would be, well, how do you create a good environment to sustain those actions to build the learning behavior, whatever it may be? So that's where you get in. You mentioned James Clear. That's where you get into habits. That's where you get into psychological safety from a leadership standpoint of creating a good environment that encourages these behavior. So go back to vegetables. Rather than just telling our kids to eat more vegetables, the mindset shift would be, vegetables are bland and boring, to vegetables can be healthy and delicious when prepared properly. That's a mindset shift. Then the environment would be, I make delicious, well-prepared vegetables readily available in my environment. So I change my mindset, I fix my environment. That's the better pathway to eating more vegetables than just telling someone 1,000 times to do it.
Yeah. And all those decisions that you make along the way of like, well, fill the refrigerator with vegetables and put them in the front, so it's the first thing that I see versus buried in the drawer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or, take the tub of Ben and Jerry's and duct tape it shut and shove it in the back. And so if you choose ice cream, it's a really difficult choice to make rather than the easiest choice to make.
It's like that you can go down a huge wormhole with habits, but in the end, it's just understanding friction. It's like, if you want to do something more, make it easier. If you want to stop doing something, make it harder. But then as leaders, we need to understand how important that is as well. And so kind of expanding on that would be, as a leader, I'm saying, I want you to be a good learner. I want you to grow. Cool. We made our mindset shifts. I explained growth mindset. I told you it's okay to be nervous and uncomfortable. Great. But then what if my environment punishes every mistake? It's like, you see, like, if the environment doesn't support the behavior, I'm not going to get enough reps at the behavior to build it. Not saying we praise mistakes, but what we're praising is the attempt, the swing. So I'm not cheering that you hit it into the net. I'm cheering that you tried the new approach, you tried the new serve, you tried the new shot. And that's kind of like, that's like getting into the weeds a bit, but I think that's a good adjustment to make, where sometimes, like, people like us, we know if you spend 20 minutes researching learning, you know the value of mistakes, but then it's easy to be like, oh, praise mistakes. It's like, that's not exactly what we're doing. We're praising the rep that just so happened to end in a mistake. And when you explain it like that, it makes way more sense for the audience, way more sense for the players, of like, oh, you're not cheering for me that I missed it. You're cheering for me that I shot it, which encourages more shots. Like, yeah.
And I mean, if you've coached long enough, or, I mean, you've sat in many a gym in multiple sports and watched a coach shut down creativity, shut down risk taking, because they do criticize every single mistake. And I've been guilty of this myself, of like, well, and instead of asking a kid, well, what did you try to do there? And they saw the right thing, and they saw the situation, they understood the situation, they made the right choice, and they didn't execute it correctly. They didn't really do anything wrong except, make the wrong execution. So guess what? That's learning. Like, go get some reps on that.
And if they're going to correct it, we need them doing it more. But if my response to the failure is suboptimal, they're not going to do it more. And so I learned this from Amy Edmondson, and she researches psychological safety, mostly in like the healthcare, not healthcare, but medical like realm, like with hospitals and doctors. And so she calls this inviting action, which is good. We want to invite actions that lead to growth, asking questions, sharing ideas, trying new things. But she goes, just as important as inviting action is monitoring your response to the action, which is like, if I'm like, okay, John, if you ever have an idea or have some feedback from me, my door's open, share it. And then one day you share it with me and I tell you you're an idiot, or that's a terrible idea. I just squashed further action.
Yeah.
Now I don't have to like be fake about it. If you come to me and the idea actually isn't that great, I don't have to be like, this is the best idea in the whole world, John, you're the greatest. But what I can say is praise the attempt.
Yeah.
It was really brave of you to share this with me. And I know it's scary to do that. No matter what I say, it's always going to be scary. And you did that. Here are some holes in the idea that might need fixing, but if we could fix those, this idea could work. So I praised the courageous act. My response is going to lead to more action by you. And then we got to work with honesty and candor on the idea that you brought to the table. And coaches, we can use this same format as well. We invite mistakes. We invite trial and error. We invite action. Be aware of your response when the action happens. It's very important.
Yeah. And I also like, and I'm totally spacing on the research now, but from an environmental standpoint, and I think the research is in education, and just the difference when, I sit down with two groups of students and one, I say, I've given you your papers covered with red ink, because it's not right. And the other one saying, I've graded this difficult for you because I believe in you. And I know that you have it in you to write a great paper or pass math or whatever. That thing as a coach to say, I know I'm being hard on you right now, but it's because I know that you have another level in you, and it's going to come out here soon. That changes everything, right?
Yeah. Like the study was awesome. I just saw it too. It's called like the 5 magic words of feedback or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is the thing I wish more leaders understood is just say that, because what happens is we mark up the paper and it is coming from a good place. It usually is. It really is, because that's the truth. We know that you're capable or more. I know that you can build on this. I'm giving you tough feedback because I know you can grow. But the problem is we don't say it. So if we just take the time to be like, here is why, like, here's where I'm coming from, that little adjustment can make the feedback received in a different way and more actionable moving forward. And so those are the things that kind of intrigue me a lot, which is, what are the small adjustments we can make on stuff that would lead to big change? And I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So I was interviewing a researcher named Ali Kroom, and she's from Stanford. And she has this concept she calls a wise intervention. And so I'm going to kind of simplify it, but her main thing is this. If you look into the world of research, there's all sorts of crap that leads to like change. Like there are things you can do that lead to high effect size. But she goes, we created sort of a filter to get down to the things that matter the most. So what a wise intervention is: universal, so it helps a lot of people, high impact, and this is the third, feasible, usable. And so I think about this a lot when in the conversations you and I have, the stuff that you and I talk about, which is some people in the learning and leadership world, we talk about things that could be good interventions, but they're not feasible. It would be so great if every student in school took a nap in a hyperbaric chamber for an hour a day. Guess what we can't do? That. It'd be so great if the teacher to student ratio in schools was 2-to-1. Guess what we can't do? That. And so in searching for wise interventions, it's what are things we can actually do now? Let's talk about those first. Now, I'm not saying cut off the bigger dreams and bigger goals, but I think this hunt for wise interventions is kind of useful for leaders, people like you and me. It's like, let's share things that people can actually do today or tomorrow or next week. And it's not a huge revamp of every single thing we do and say.
Right. And I mean, when you do an all day workshop for someone, or Jerry and I do a, 16-hour 2-day conference or whatever, who cares if you have a notebook full of notes if you can't use anything, right? and
Yeah.
and so I always say,
Yeah.
like, find your 10%, right? Like, what's
Yes.
one thing
Yeah.
that you could layer in, and
Mm-hmm.
if it works, then you go, man, maybe there's something more in there,
Yeah.
and then layer in something else, but never throw out everything you've always
Yep.
done. And I think that's what you're talking about. That's like the wise
Yeah.
intervention.
Yeah. It's like, look, I'm not saying everything you do is wrong. What I am saying is a, a few small adjustments to the way you give feedback, how you structure a practice, how you talk about learning can make a big difference. And that's the low hanging fruit. It's like, let's make those adjustments. That's easier to apply and more accessible for people, which I think is good.
Yeah. And I think there's this misconception that learning or practice design or whatever is like, it's a black and white thing, that it either works or not. And I always try to, like, for me, it's the underlying belief of saying this is on a scale of efficacy, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
just because something works doesn't mean there's not a more effective way to do it. And in
Yeah.
my world of working with coaches, I have yet to have a coach come to me and say, I've got way too much practice time, I need to give some back. Right. So if you don't have enough time, then you better be as effective and efficient with it as
Yep.
possible. And so
Mm-hmm.
how about you layer in this
Yeah.
and replace this, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and I think those are the wise interventions.
Yes.
Those, I mean, I would say one of the wisest interventions that we try to give people, Jerry and I call it the rule of one, right? One person, one comment, one time. Like,
Yeah.
and so when I'm coaching in the moment and my words are wrong or someone's head goes down, can I intervene? Can I catch someone being
Yeah.
good? Can I do
Mm-hmm.
that? But I think where I've added to that is, even if I miss it in the moment, I've noticed that at the end of practice, that's still okay. Right.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that if I've screwed it up in practice and at the end of practice, I can still send a note to the kids'
Yep.
parents and
Yeah.
say, I saw I saw you're frustrated today, and I know you've been working on it, and it's okay.
Mm.
It's going to come. You've improved so much. You're just not seeing the results. That can carry a kid for a month.
That okay. That kind of gives me chills, because this is like more stuff I've been learning from Amy Edmondson. So not only can that carry the kid for the month, of course it can, but another layer underneath that, what's happening under the hood there is you're modeling sort of the values of the program, which is this: it might not happen overnight, but if you, when maybe you don't say the right thing, whatever, you send the note and you own it, over time you're creating an environment where it's safer for the players to own their mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the action of owning a mistake, taking responsibility for it, if the leader is modeling this behavior over time, it creates an environment that encourages that from their athletes. And so this approach, I think, is brilliant, which is, what are actions I want to see? How do I start to put them on display? Because that will make a safer environment for others to do the same. And I know you've seen this. So we were talking before we recorded, it's like doing these virtual presentations. Almost every time, the end of a presentation, we'll go, does anyone have a question? Crickets.
Yeah.
Then one person asks a question, and what happens next?
Yeah. Then it's
9
the floodgates
people
open.
ask.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like, it's this human nature to be aware of, like the courageous act of one creates safety for others. And so it's like such a cool idea to be aware of as a leader. And you see the examples of it all around us. And so like what you just explained is that it's like, not only is that a powerful message to own it and share that with the athlete, but you're creating an environment where down the road, they are more likely to do that now, which is awesome. What a skill to get some reps at.
Yeah. And I think what's also important is that the opposite of that is true, is one negative act will open the floodgates for other negative acts, right? And so you're also your job as a leader is to prevent those and certainly never, condone them, because and my favorite story with this is back in the day, I used to, if like a team of mine in Oregon won a state championship and we had to go off to like a regional championship. And so we're here in the mountains of Oregon, and it's April and it's May and it's cold. And in June, we have to go to Hawaii and play. Right. Well, I can't replicate 95 and humidity on the soccer field, but we used to do hot yoga together.
Yeah.
And so we do that once a week and it was fun. But what I noticed all the time was that when on those days when it's really hot in that room, this is not just with my team, like everyone would tough it out until one person took a knee. And then it was like, everyone sat and there's just this thing of like, oh, well, if she's going to do it, it's okay for me to give up too. And so it works both ways, and super 100%. Important to be as a leader, like, instill the courage, condemn the cowardice. I don't know if that's the right word, but
and so it's like our actions affect those around us more than we realize, but I don't want people to like freak out about it, because what you explained, the example that you threw out, is my action wasn't great, but then I owned it, and so you can fix it. So like, I don't want people to be like, I have to be perfect and say and do the right thing all the time. It's like, no, our actions do affect others. And if it's not perfect, I can own that. Yeah. And that's a powerful moment of modeling as well.
Yeah. Or just don't give up. Or you know what, when you see your teammate giving up, pick her up, lift her up. Yeah. Right. This is where teams come in too, right? This is where your trainer in the gym comes in, of like, hey, I got you here. Like, come on, you're going to do those last reps. You're going to do the last set, whatever. And this is where we need coaches and teammates.
I think it's an empowering topic, because this is really important for a leader to understand. It's great. It's also important for teammates to understand. I can affect the environment more than I know.
Yeah. So what I love about your work is and I think this is great with all learners, is that we come out with one thing and then we find some nuance to it. And you talked about the nuance of the sort of the jungle tiger thing. And you talk about in your new book, the nuance around mindset as well. And so how it's sort of like, gone from, just have a growth mindset to, well, how do we build a growth mindset? And so maybe talk about like mindset and actions, and this idea of the importance of belief rather than action.
Right. So I would say most of the people listening to this have heard of Carol Dweck and her mindset research. It's been a hot topic for years now. So a lot of schools and sports teams and corporate groups are familiar with the term, but oftentimes we get stuck on the surface level, which is Carol Dweck learned that having a growth mindset makes you a better learner and leads to better outcomes, so you should have one. And I'll be honest, I did that. That's how I used to talk about it too. And I have the footage and I have the old posts, and it like hurts my chest, because it's like, again, that's the just eat vegetables approach, which is like, just have a growth mindset. And so a pivot we made, and this was 2, 3, or 4 years ago, which is like, okay, we know that believing you can grow is one of the most important steps in becoming a better learner, because you can prove that statement by looking at the opposite, which is, if I don't believe I can learn something, big skill, small skill, I'm probably not going to sustain enough action to build the skill. And that's just straight up logic. If I don't believe I can get stronger, probably not working out. If I don't believe I can learn math, I'm not really going to work at the subject. If I don't believe I can learn a jump serve, probably not going to practice. So using that logic, we say, okay, the antidote then is, how do you help people believe they can build that skill? That's a growth mindset. Now the question is, how do you build that belief? Rather than just some 2 guys on a podcast telling you to have a growth mindset, like, what do you build it out of? So we go through this in the book, but some tools that we've like fell into that seem pretty good. And one is really simple. This is a pretty wise intervention, which is a little bit of reflection is really good here. And so we have people in our workshops. This is like my favorite brainstorm to do. I go, especially with adults, I go 20 seconds on the clock. With a neighbor, share 2 skills you're good at. And there's always 5 seconds of nothing. And you can see in a lot of people's faces, they like scrunch their face and they're like, like, am I good at stuff? And the answer to that question is 100% yes, you are. It's like, that's a problem with learning we have to fix. Like, the truth is, we're all growing all the time. Like, we're all growing every month, every year, every week. We're getting better at stuff. I think the last year and a half is proof of that. We can do things that we couldn't do a year and a half ago. Now, the problem is sometimes we don't recognize that growth. Sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for the growth. So in our brainstorms, there's 500 people in the audience. Everyone shares 2 skills. That's a lot of skills. Every single one of those skills has 2 things in common. Once upon a time, you weren't as good at that thing as you are now. And that was changed through experience. And that is proof you learned that thing. And so I know it seems kind of like a trivial conversation or brainstorm, but there's a little power underneath it, which is, the belief I'm trying to build is, I believe I could grow, growth mindset. This is kind of a backdoor way of reinforcing that, which is, I believe I can learn stuff because I have learned stuff. And so looking back and kind of giving ourselves the credit we deserve for all the skills we built. Like, the truth is, every single thing we do in life is supported by skills we've built. It's like, think about how many skills that is, and think about all the learning that we've done. And then sometimes we just don't recognize that. And so that little 5-minute exercise is kind of a good way to help people see the evidence in front of them that they are capable of learning. And if you're capable of learning, you can double down and you can do it more. And so that's like one really good strategy, I think.
Yeah, I love that strategy. And it's funny, in your book, you share a clip of, I don't know how many years ago, of you interviewing Carol Dweck, and you're like, and this is me, nervous Trevor, and whatever. And it's like, I mean, at least you and I have this like video and audio record of our growth sometimes that other people don't have. Right. I listen to old podcasts. I'm like, oh my God.
I know, man.
Yeah. So
it's good. But so like, there's a couple ways to look at it. And again, easy to say, hard to do. The fact that we cringe is proof that we're growing. So it's like kind of a good thing, because if we're like, oh yeah, I was perfect, it's like, then I haven't grown much. But honestly, that's kind of been the unexpected benefit of the audiobook format, which is like, in a book, I could have quoted Dweck, but now I can like play the old clip, and it kind of adds a little more juice to the story, which is like, you can paint the scene and you can hear. It's like my first question, I'm like, hi, can you tell us about who you are? It's funny because you're showing like the growth, and there's clever little things you can do to tell the story with the audiobook format that it's been kind of fun to experiment with.
Yeah, no, it was cool. I think the first person I heard do it, I think Malcolm Gladwell did it with one of his recent books. He did it that way. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And when I wrote Every Moment Matters, I'm like, oh, the audiobook, like, great, like it's all podcast interviews. I have all this audio, and so when I got the publisher, I was like, I have all this. Like, yeah, we're not going to do that. And they're like, you're gonna read the book. We're not going through all that footage to pull out quotes, whatever. And I was like, oh, it would be so much cooler. And they're like, yeah, and it'll be like 10 times the hour. So no, we're not going to do that.
That's the thing, is like, your library, I can't even imagine, dude. I've made 17 podcast episodes. Like, I have no idea what your number is, but just like the amount of hours of footage that you have, I can't even imagine trying to like go through that and find like the clip that you need.
Well, yeah, it was funny. And I mean, obviously yours are very different and edited, and, mine are just straight up interview and, the good, the bad, the ugly. But what's interesting about it is, Yeah, there's so many. And then when I wrote that book, I just started getting them all transcribed because I knew there was something
Nice.
in there. And rather than listening to an
Yeah.
hour, I'm like, I can scan
Yeah.
there's the piece
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then I could cut and
So
paste the
smart.
transcription into a text. But yeah, it's so cool. So, all right. So I like that tool, right? So that's a
Okay.
great tool.
Reflection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So another one,
Yeah.
the other one is, so, okay. It's one thing to say you need to believe you could grow. Where's like, give me more, give me more. So I interview this guy named Dr. Michael Merzenich. He's kind of like the dude in the world of neuroscience. And so none of us have heard of him, but in the world of neuroscience, he's known as the father of neuroplasticity. So he's like in the early 70s, he's one of the not first people to discover this, but kind of on the cutting edge of this research that shows like, oh, when you actually learn, your brain physically changes. Your brain is building new connections when you learn stuff. And what they found in the research is like, one, your brain is capable of change throughout your life. It's like, it's what makes humans special. Our brains remain plastic, which allows us to adapt and build skills. And so many powerful discoveries like came out of this concept. And so I interviewed Merzenich, and it was a great conversation. A lot of it's kind of over my head because he's talking about neuroscience, but like this moment halfway through, and again, I've showed this clip in my workshop, so I've seen this clip 800 times, but every time it kind of chokes me up. He just kind of looks at the camera and he goes, the bottom line is absolutely everyone can get better at virtually anything.
Yeah.
Our brains are learning machines, and if you use them properly, they can get better at skills, and most things in life are skills. And he kind of like, then he goes into like the weeds, and he's saying like, look, I'm not saying anyone can do anything, but what I am saying is if it's a skill, you can absolutely get better at it through the right type of practice. And it's like, dang, that's a powerful idea. And that's not like someone just peddling motivational tweets at us here. This is someone who's been studying brain since 1970 saying this. Yeah. And it just like sticks with me. And I think perhaps the most effective way to get people into a growth mindset, and we're never going to stay there all the time. Like, again, like it's what we want to do is believe we could grow. We're not always going to believe we can grow in every scenario we're in, but one way to spend more time there is to help people understand it's like, yo, our brains are literally built for learning. They're built to grow and capable of growth when we use them properly. And that is such a powerful message to share with people. And so I see neuroplasticity as sort of a bedrock of an authentic growth mindset. So growth mindset is, I believe I can grow. The neuroplasticity is saying, you can definitely grow. And so when you teach people that, it's hard not to kind of fall into more of a growth mindset when you think about learning.
Yeah. And I was listening to an interview the other day with Daniel Goleman, the guy around emotional intelligence. And so I think about this, right? Like as a coach, I'm telling my kids to learn a new skill that might be a technical in nature or tactical in nature. But I think as a leader, probably the place that most of us have the most room for growth is in emotional intelligence. And he was talking about how IQ is heavily influenced by genetics, whereas EQ is heavily influenced by skill development. And so we can all get so much better in our EQ. And I would challenge any coach, any leader out there. Are you telling me that if you didn't grow in this way, you wouldn't connect with players, communicate better, motivate better, inspire more? Like this is your area of the biggest chance for growth that's also not limited by genetics.
100%. And so it's like the semantics and how you talk about all of this really, really, really matters, because it's like when Merzenich talks about it, when we talk about it, we say skills can be built. And then, yes, your genes can play a role in this. Yes, your personality types can play a role in this as far as where you land and how fast you go. But there are some skills like that how do I say this? The less dependent the skill is on physical traits, the more accessible it is to pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
And so probably not going to learn to dunk. I'm like 5'9". So like, no matter how many times I try, I can't, because that skill has physical limitations baked into it. So then it's like, okay, the less the physical stuff matters, the more accessible it is. And so that the emotional intelligence and understanding that is accessible to everyone, because it's not dependent on how tall you are, how fast you are. Yeah. So that is a skill that is available, where our room to grow in that skill is massive, where, look, I'm just not going to learn to dunk. I just can't.
Right. Yeah. And that's I think in the sporting world, the more dynamic your game is, invasion games, whatever game, and the more important game intelligence is, the more egalitarian the sport is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like straight up 100-yard dash, genetics have a lot to do with it. Right. Yeah. Being a center in the NBA, genetics have a ton to do with it. Right. Soccer.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of shapes and sizes that have great success in the game. Now you need some genetics, right? You need some ability, of course, but your ability to think quickly and read situations will offset some of your potential physical limitations.
Absolutely. So even when a lot of genes are at play, learning can happen, and there's a benefit to learning. And then when the physical stuff isn't as play, there's so much, it's like the Wild West. It's like, all right, who's going to be the best learner here? Who's going to like outdevelop others? And that's kind of exciting too. So it's kind of fun for me to like, I've got to experience both, like the come up of trying to play sports at the college level, kind of hitting my ceiling there, and then getting to do stuff like this, which is, I kind of treat this as like a competition. Like I'm trying to look around and like find the best ways to do stuff. And I'm getting like that competitive fix. I get to make stuff, but this is like, there's really no ceiling on top of what I can do, because it doesn't matter how tall I am. It doesn't matter how fast I am. Like what matters now is like, can I be creative? Can I come up with like new ways to share stuff? Can I come up with new stuff to share? It's just fun, and being in an industry that allows you to do that, and most of us is exciting when you think of it that way.
Yeah. Oh my God, totally. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me is we're all, the idea of coach, right? The etymology of the word, right, is like to take someone on a journey from, someplace they've, never been before to a place they've never been before. Like that's a coach. It's the old Hungarian word where it came from. Right. And so we're taking people on a journey. And so we need to take ourselves on that similar journey and do it. COVID for me was a really interesting time as a coach, because we had challenges here in Oregon, where I live, where, it's 95 degrees in the summer and kids are wearing masks. And so I was forced to rethink coaching, but I was also forced to get constant feedback from the kids. How is this? Is it too much? Is it too little? Because I didn't want anyone to die of heat stroke. Yeah. Right. So I'm like, I'm constantly asking them, did that work? How could I tweak it? And it was funny. And what I saw happening was more ownership by them, more investment by them. And then, in those times when I would stop practice and I'd be like, this isn't working right now. What do you guys think we should do? And the kids would be like, if we made the space a little bigger, or if you move that. And then it was like, yeah, let's try that. And then they're like totally into it. And so for me, it was this great eye opener of like, get feedback from those in front of you instead of being the sage on the stage. It was a really cool way to do it.
I think it's awesome. And like, let's just be honest, like the last year and a half has been terrible for so many reasons. And I'm not trying to flip it into, but we grew, so it's good. No, it's terrible. And I hope none of us have to like do anything like this ever again. But sort of the unique thing is it was universal. Like everyone was thrown in this together. And I can't really think of another example of that, where it's like, for an extended period of time where there's no visible finish line, everyone was affected in one way or the other, like firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And just to see like how different people responded and like the creativity of the groups that I work with, the different schools that I work with, just that example right there. It's like, wow, what if I asked them about practice, not just their mask? It's like, oh, like this was really cool. Like we were forced into this, essentially forced out of our comfort zone. And there's so much like growth that happened. And I think it's really cool. And it says a ton about like all these different groups and the learning that happened. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's so great. So I want to bring this to an end here. I two more questions. And first, just tell people how to get the book, because what's really cool is you're giving it away here on your podcast. So tell people about the Learner Lab and your website and everything, which is just this like treasure trove of great stuff.
Nice. thelearnerlab.com. You can go there. I think the videos we make are really good. I wish we made more of them. They
take a little while, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The quality of your videos is super high.
All of this I like. Yeah. And so this new project we have going, we're calling it the audiobook, which is really corny, but we're going with it. So it's basically like I wrote a book, and I think a cool experiment to run is let's record the audiobook, which I'm doing. And then every Tuesday for the next 2 months, I'm releasing like 4 or 5 chapters at a time. And so just today, we released chapters 5 through 8. So now like 1 through 8 are there, and you can find them anywhere you get your podcast. And so it's a fun experiment, which is if it was just an Audible book, maybe you have to download the Audible app. This is, nope, it's on a podcast platform. And so most people can find one or the other. And I think so far it's been cool. We've got a really good response. It's been fun for me to just kind of get this feedback. And then throughout the week, I get to work on the next batch of chapters, learning some like sound design stuff and running some different experiments there. It's been really fun. It's really hard, but so far so good.
Yeah, well, I know that when I recorded, I did the written book first and then recorded the audiobook, and I was just really upset at the author for some of the terrible sentences in there. I was like, who the hell wrote this, man? This is awful right now. Like, I gotta fix that. In the studio, the sound engineer, he's like, you read that wrong. I'm like, yeah, because that sentence sucked. And I wrote the book, so I'm changing it for the audiobook right now. I'm making it better.
I love it.
That's awesome. And any last thoughts, Trevor? And like this morning, I got up and I listened to 5 through 8 to get ready for this. So I haven't heard the end of the book yet either, but I know your work, and I know there's so much more awesome stuff coming. Any final thoughts for our listeners, our coaches, on how they can be great learners and help their kids be better learners?
Yeah, so I think, again, if we're going wise intervention approach, it's like, this isn't going to be in the book because the book is mostly about just the individual side of learning, and maybe the next book will be more about leadership. But the latest video we made was kind of about the leadership side of growth mindset, which is not how does my mindset affect my capacity to grow, but we looked at how does the mindset of the leader affect the growth of their people, not the actions of the leader, the mindset of the leader. And it was this cool deep dive we did into some like old research in psychology that looks into like the different ways that my expectations of you affect how I treat you. And it was like a really cool project. I interviewed this researcher from UC Riverside who's 90, and he's one of the 100 most cited psychology researchers ever. And it was just like one of the coolest videos. I sent it to him, and he like learned how to use YouTube and watched it and got to see his interview. And I'm not like, people can watch the video if they want. I'm not trying to sell them on the video, but the end of the punchline of the video is there's so many different labels and expectations we can have of the people around us. And those definitely change how I treat them. And so it's kind of overwhelming of like, well, what are the best labels? Do I have really high expectations? Do I have lower expectations? Where do I set the bar? How do I do this? Robert Rosenthal, this 90-year-old researcher, he simplified it, and he goes, don't worry about coming up with the exact bar to set. He goes, the label you should use is learner. He's like, everyone you work with is a learner and they're capable of growth and you should treat them accordingly. And I was like, ooh. And like that made me change the name of my website. Website used to be trainugly.com. After that conversation, it was thelearnerlab.com because it's like, whoa. And so it like changed my mission, changed the name, which is that's what I'm chasing now. How as individuals can we become better learners? And then as leaders, how do I create a better environment for learning? And so that one adjustment, and I like how he added this at the end, and treat them accordingly. That's pretty cool, which is, of course, there's going to be different strengths and weaknesses in different positions. And some players are going to be better than other players at all the skills that we're teaching. But whether they're really good at this thing or not so good at this thing, they are both capable of growth. And it's like, yeah, that word really does kind of hold us accountable from a leadership perspective.
And I think it's important. Rosenthal's research, if I'm not mistaken, was on students where he like randomly, like he did a quote test and then told teachers who was capable of more. And it was just, he just like gave them random names, but he told them. And then the kids who he said were the ones capable of more were the ones who did the best in the classes, correct?
Yeah. So it was like, gave all the students this exam. Then they give the school like 20 names or something. He's like, here are the bloomers in the school, the ones that will make the most progress. Then he comes back a year later, gives the same students the same exam. Weirdly enough, the students on the list do way better than the students not on the list. And this is important because the students weren't aware of the label here at all. The teachers were. And so that's sort of the essence of his work is when they replicate the study and look at the data they found, the two mediating mechanisms, the two things that mattered, the teachers would treat the bloomers a bit more warmly, like create a warmer climate. And then the key was they would teach them more and more difficult material. And so it's like, yeah, no kidding. Extra reps, more challenging reps, a warmer climate, probably going to grow more. Yeah. And so I don't know, his research is interesting. We did an overview, but like in the end, it's the people we work with are people. And if they're people, they're capable of growth. And then as a leader, I have to treat them accordingly.
Treat them accordingly. We'll end on that. Trevor, this was awesome. Congrats on the book. Congrats on your amazing work. And it's so good to see you again, my friend, and hopefully in person sometime soon.
Sometime soon. You're the best. It's always a blast to have these conversations.
Awesome, man. Thanks for being on The Way, Champions.